April Fool's Day, Aprilia Fool's Day. This is the best joke I could come up with on short notice, because this is very short notice. A massive MotoGP bombshell coming out today. We were not planning to record much of anything, and, best laid plans and whatnot. You can probably see or hear, Simon, you're currently in some form of an airport. Which one?
The worst form of airport, actually. I'm in
Paris-Beauvais,
which is a Ryanair hub north of the city, right. And it's basically a shed with some planes outside. It's got real 1970s vibe, but yeah.
My apologies to Heathrow. I don't actually remember anything about how I feel about it. Yeah, I'm sorry. I caused the diplomatic incident immediately a minute into this recording. We're here to talk about Aprilia and Jorge Martin. Multiple reports in the Spanish media came out today, first from motorsport.com, Joran Garcia Casanova, secondly in IS, Mela Charcalis. There's two journalists who would know that Jorge Martin has informed Aprilia that he currently intends, as it is, to execute a clause that would allow him to leave the manufacturer at the end of the 2025 season. The clause is understood to relate to results into the French Grand Prix, basically at the French Grand Prix cutoff point of the season. And there's an indication that Martin is willing, or at least that's how it's being portrayed, to give Aprilia a few more races to demonstrate to him why he should honor the 2-year portion of the contract and not activate the clause. I should say I've worked at one of the places that broke this story. I have absolutely zero doubt in my mind that, this is happening, that there are things going on behind the scene. But Simon, was there any indication in the MotoGP paddock at Le Mans or before that something wasn't quite right in going on behind the scenes?
None whatsoever. I'm also sure that this is right, but that's fundamentally because the two journalists that have ran this story are two journalists that we've seen, Jorge Martin, Alessio Spargaro, and Pedro Acosta's manager, Albert Valera, brief in the past, both on and off the record, with information. And this is, like, fundamentally reading their pieces today. This is information that could only have come from either Martin's management team or Aprilia's management team. So it's very obvious where their source is for this news. It's very, very obvious. And I think that, with that in mind, we have to take what we have as fact. But I think it's also very important to remember that we only have one side of it. The person writing this has not seen the contract and doesn't know what Massimo Rivola is thinking right now. And I'm sure that there is a bit of a creative interpretation on the spin put on it, because, it's the old line about there's always 3 versions of the truth: your version, my version, and the actual truth in the middle.
Yeah.
And that's what's going on here. There is obviously going to be spin going on here, because there's absolutely no other reason to leak this right now than to do it as some form of spin around Martin's plans.
Yeah, it's obviously it's a complicated situation, because we cannot say for sure, when it comes to journalism, the exact mechanics of a story originating are always, the journalists who write, they want to keep that as hidden as possible. So that's never going to be, I think, totally matter of public record. And this is the kind of situation where neither Aprilia nor Jorge Martin currently have to go through any official channels to address it.
It's the bit that makes this really strange. None of this had to be made public, but Martin's side have chosen to. And that's actually, for me, that's probably the most interesting part of this story right now, because there's obviously been negotiations going on behind the scenes, and they've kind of decided to, I guess, maybe try and force Aprilia's hand, or force the hand of the other manufacturers to bring this into the public. And that's the bit I really, really don't understand about the story right now, because I don't see what they have to gain by doing that right now. Because it's not going to change anything about actually. As you may have figured out, like, a lot of this podcast is very much on the fly, and we're making this up as we go. The only thing I can think of that would have forced their hand to bring this public right now is that they want Martin to have a factory Honda seat next year, and they're worried that Johan Zarco's win yesterday is going to launch him into prime contention to replace Luca Marini, and this is an attempt to sabotage those negotiations by at least stalling them long enough for them to make it clear to Honda that they're interested and available. But they believe they're available.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation where also, Jorge Martin isn't going to be racing at Silverstone, almost certainly, so you will not have to face the media about it. Aprilia will face questions, or almost certainly will face questions at the MotoGP broadcast. There's going to be some of the...
Traditionally with Aprilia, they will come to the print media as well and face questions. That is how they operate. They're very good at that side of the media stuff. So we will, like, Massimo Rivola will address this both on TV and in the kind of more informal, more informative format of a media scrum at some point in the next 10 days.
So let's recap. Jorge Martin signed what was then announced as a multi-year deal last year with Aprilia. It was a situation where sort of the rider was more of an asset than the team. So there's a bit of a power mismatch. The rider is a championship contender. The team has almost never been a championship contender. You can talk about the Aleix Espargaro year a little bit here and there, but you know what I mean. And obviously, when there's a bit of a power reputation mismatch, clauses get worked in. Jorge Martin's camp also has previous with clauses. It was widely reported during his KTM termination and after that his exit from KTM to join MotoGP with Pramac Ducati, was made possible by a performance clause that, well, let's explain it in full as far as we know it and as far as it's been reported. One of the KTM bikes in MotoGP needed to be in the top 10 in the MotoGP standings for that clause not to be activated. But at the moment where the cutoff time was, there were no MotoGP standings because COVID had suspended the season. So no racing had taken place. And I think KTM still holds a considerable grudge against Jorge Martin's camp for using those circumstances, as they say it, to extricate themselves from the KTM MotoGP deal in favor of a Ducati future, which, it's worked out okay for Jorge Martin, but in terms of the status that he enjoys right now that no KTM MotoGP rider has enjoyed, but that's neither here nor there. We know there's previous from Martin's camp in using performance options. We have every reason to believe that Martin's desire to extricate himself from Aprilia is genuine. Now the only thing that makes sense is to me Honda. I think to you also Honda. We're not going to hear about it publicly, but that's really the only piece of the puzzle that would make total sense for me. But before we get to that, Simon, just like taking aside the circumstances in which the story is coming out, this is not how you would have played this, right? This doesn't...
I like I've already said, I don't understand the motivation to make this public when it was never going to be public, really. The best case scenario here is that Martin leaves Aprilia at the end of this year and probably earns less money on a worse bike at another team. Because I don't think there's another manufacturer in MotoGP with a bike that is as ready to win races as the Aprilia is right now, apart from Ducati. And he kind of fundamentally burned his bridges by, kind of throwing his toys out of the pram and rushing off to sign an Aprilia contract over the course of like 6 hours and the Mugello Monday test last year. So I don't think he's going to find a better option necessarily than the one that he has right now. But there's a very real possibility that he finds a much worse option and that he suddenly discovers that he's stuck at a team that he's publicly told he doesn't want to be at for another 18 months, where he's under no motivation to perform. They're under no motivation to, reward him or benefit him or help him develop. I mean, if he's told you he wants to leave one race into his contract, essentially, because that is what it is. It's one race. He's raced for one race for this team. Then you just focus all of your development work on Ayagura, who's shaping up to be like, have almost a Fabio Quartararo-esque rookie season on a bike that's not as good as the Ducatis that he's fighting against. They have a ready-made replacement. And actually, this is the weird thing. Because of the injuries that he suffered, I actually think that power balance has swung a bit back in the favor of Aprilia right now. Because we're mid-contract cycle, they have a replacement. Martin doesn't have an obvious route to go to. It's odd. It's really, really odd. One thing that I also don't understand is that I wouldn't have, even if I wanted this out there, I wouldn't have done it publicly this side of him coming back to MotoGP.
Yeah.
And
I understand that.
The timing of kind of whenever you link the timing and some of these stories together, you can kind of you can see the puzzle. And I think you can maybe even read into a little bit of some of the stuff that we're not being told from the Martin camp. Because the story, one of the stories, I can't remember which one, says that he's targeting a Sachsen return at the German Grand Prix in July. It also says that he's decided to give Aprilia 6 races from his return. And it also says that this clause expired, in theory, this weekend at the French Grand Prix. I don't think it's a coincidence that the French Grand Prix is round 6 of the championship and that there's 6 races from the Sachsenring to Misano. I think maybe what we've not been told here is that it's 6 races of him on the bike before this clause is triggered, and that there is more to this than we're being told right now. And that's where we kind of lose out from only being briefed on one side of it. The whole thing is a mess, really, in terms of how to handle this from a media perspective, because no one really gains here apart from the journalists that get to talk about the story.
Yeah, so thanks very much for that, by the way.
I mean, I'd rather be sipping a coffee than recording a podcast on the floor of a Parisian budget airport right now. But you get where I'm coming from. It's almost like, the only other possible reason for announcing this now, apart from an attempt to scupper Martin's or Zarco's Honda plans, is because they thought that no one was talking about Jorge Martin at this point in the season because he's missed 6 races, and I know a way to launch his name back into all the headlines.
It's been very funny watching the season, because obviously last year when the MotoGP intro with all the riders, it majored on like 3 riders at the end of the intro. And this year, the end of the intro is like 10 seconds of Jorge Martin. And every time you're watching this, you're like, oh, well, you've spent the biggest part of your intro on a rider who's not here, who is like repeatedly, consistently not here, which just this has been a funny thing to observe. I would say certainly this is getting me to talk about Jorge Martin, and I'm very grateful for it coming out. It's very, very exciting. For me, the big question is, I'm pro riders generally maneuvering themselves into whatever position they need to get themselves in that's best for their career. That's my general stance. I implicitly accept this as part of the game in MotoGP in almost every scenario. I just think when you're one guy against a company, even if, in Aprilia's case, that's not some massive behemoth. It's, it's a family style racing team.
Exactly. Yeah.
But in this case, I just want to understand what's changed from the Aprilia that Martin signed his deal with to the Aprilia that exists now. The bike has not had a great start, but I just don't see how you can see it as a huge downgrade based on the evidence that you had so far, because you're not there to ride it.
I don't think the bike has had a really bad start. I think Marco Bezzecchi's had a really bad start.
Yeah.
The guy who was struggling last year continues to struggle this year, but meanwhile, there's a rookie that no one really rated that much when he came into MotoGP, knocking out top 6s like it's going out of style. The bike looks really good in the hands of Agura. And, I mean, that is the performances of Marco Bezzecchi alone, given his 2024 season, should not be what Jorge Martin is pinning his entire MotoGP future on right now. It's insane if that's what they've based this on.
Yeah, and I don't think it is. I think the bike's a mystery box for me right now as it stands, because the only rider who you can compare 24 to 25 is Raul Fernandez, who in certain ways is just fundamentally broken right now, who you cannot use as a great barometer of year-on-year progress, etc. Aprilia says the bike is better than last year. We've seen flashes to suggest it's better. We've also seen some, shaky stuff, basically, and we've seen...
Literally.
Yes. Yeah, the stability issues on...
Yeah.
Corner exit, corner entry, etc. And Marco Bezzecchi taking big trips through various gravel traps. So the situation here is, if that hasn't changed, then either something else has changed about your projection of the Aprilia project, of which there is, I think, one possibility that we have to consider, which is the technical director that Jorge Martin signed to race under isn't the same as the one employed there, potentially.
Yeah, but he didn't work with Romano Bassiano long enough to former. In fact, he never worked with them because he was on gardening leave by the time they went to Barcelona testing. So he's never worked with them. So it's not like you've went to Ducati and they've got rid of Gigi Dall'Igna.
Yeah, exactly.
And they've replaced him with someone in the form of Fabiano Sterlacini, who's really highly regarded.
Yeah.
So it's not that there's no massive technical shift, or a manpower shift or anything like that. There's no budget differences. It's not KTM where the company's in the verge of bankruptcy.
Yeah.
There's none of that going on, which means the only thing I can think of, the only reason I can think that this has come about is because someone else has potentially made an offer that comes with, because it's Jorge Martin and because of what we know about Jorge Martin, that comes with a big bag of cash.
Yeah. Well,
there's no bike. No, there's no bike that's better. There's no. I know that Honda's improving. I know that Yamaha's improving, but I don't think there's a bike right now that you can definitively say, based on the riders who are on it, that it's better than what we're seeing from Aprilia. If Fabio Quartararo was on an Aprilia with 6 years of experience he has in a Yamaha, he'd be doing better than he's doing on the Yamaha.
I also tend to believe that.
So it has to be. It has to be financially driven.
So let's discuss the elephant in the room option that both you and I have repeatedly alluded to here too. And for me, I don't necessarily think it has to be totally financially driven. I think that will be it has to be part of it, but also that part is the same logic that we use to justify Fabio Quartararo staying with Yamaha year after year after year. It's because if there's a manufacturer that can afford to really move heaven and earth financially to give you a contract, it's also a manufacturer that you believe can afford to do what it needs to do for the 2027 new regulations for the 850cc bikes. In Jorge Martin's case, for me, that manufacturer has to be Honda. I don't see nothing else makes sense to me. It has to be Honda. There's a Yamaha route that I would consider if I was him. That's a 1-year Pramac deal that ensures 100% guarantees that you then get 2 years in the factory team, like from 2027. You would then get a glide path preparation to take that seat. But I don't know that he wants to go back to being a satellite rider again for any period of time. And I don't know that he wants to go into Fabio Quartararo's house. I wouldn't massively. I'm not sure I would. It has to be Honda.
But then that the only reason that essentially that all makes sense then is that he basically has buyer's regret.
Yes.
That he went to Aprilia because he had been scorned by Ducati and he made a rash decision, and now he's regretting that rash decision and he's looking at any way out possible. And that doesn't reflect very well on him, does it? If that's the case.
No.
Because I think there was still a Honda seat available when he signed for. Was there?
They were all on.
I can't remember the exact time, and I don't think Mir was signed.
Yeah, it's a good question.
When he went to Aprilia, so he's obviously just Aprilia through Aleix Espargaro basically dangled something in front of him, and he snapped at it out of just frustration and anger at Ducati. Because that's the only other reason you'd be looking now immediately to find a way to what you deem to be a better manufacturer, even if it's not a better bike.
I mean, for me, any move to switch manufacturers now is a move that acknowledges, you know what, 2026 is pointless, so I might as well use 2026 in whichever way I can to ensure that I'm in the best possible position for 2027. So a move to depart Aprilia would be twofold. It would be one, telling the whole MotoGP paddock, including Aprilia, that bike will not win anything in 2026. There is no point in me being there. Let them sort out their future, whatever that future is separate to me. They can go put Ayogura on the bike. They can ensure that then Ayogura and Marco Bezzecchi take him into the next regulation cycle, or they can sort out whatever their business is. And the second is he doesn't believe that Aprilia can do it for 2027. And he believes Honda can. And you know what? That line of thinking is justifiable. I genuinely, I don't even think this has to be necessarily purely emotional. I don't understand how the perception could have done such a 180 between the contract being signed and where we're at right now.
Like I said, it can only be because that was the perception all along.
Yes, I agree.
Even if he signed an Aprilia contract, it must have been his perception all along.
So this makes that decision look bad.
And sitting at home. No, exactly. It makes his decision to then, just signing an Aprilia contract out of nowhere. It makes that look like a rash move, like one he didn't actually believe in when he did it, or shortly after. And you got to think, like, if that's the case, then they've been plotting this for a while. This isn't something that's just happened in the last week.
Yeah. Well, if it's you also can't retroactively insert it into the contract. It's like you put it in there. So,
but I mean, I'm sure the clause. I'm sure there are clauses to get in and out. But if he has buyer's regret, it's unlikely to have happened since he was injured in Qatar.
Yeah, I agree. It sucks for Aprilia. They should, if the clause is as reported, or if it holds up to whatever, because this is the kind of thing that legal challenges are made of. 100%.
If they force this through, it's going to court.
Yeah, and then they're going to be like individual words are going to be poured over, and then honestly, like what was signed matters less than whoever is ruling will feel what was signed actually means, right?
Yes, yeah.
So potentially a wholly complicated situation for both parties involved. It's bad for Aprilia. You would have to say if a clause like that exists, they should not have put themselves in a position to where any clause like that exists. But clearly,
sure, we're not getting the full reading of what the clause is right now.
I'm sure, and I'm just sure that didn't even enter their mind that this was a possibility, because all the other contracts are out of sync, etc.
It should have, though.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah,
it should have entered the mind that he could get hurt.
Well, not just because he could get hurt, but he would.
No, I know, but that's
lose
why.
faith.
That's why it'd be very interesting to know what the actual wording of the contract is, because if it's top 10, that's very different from being top 3.
Of course,
top 3 is wildly unrealistic, and given where the Ducatis were and last year and what we expected from the Ducatis to do this year, that is not something we would have ever expected.
Yeah, I agree.
But if it's top 10 in the championship, that's a whole different thing, because like right now let me double check. The top Aprilia right now sits 10th.
Yeah, I agree.
So it depends what that is. Is it top 3? Is it top 5? If it's top 6, is it top 8? Is it top 10? And if it's top 10, is there a hell of a lot of pressure on Ayagura for the next few rounds to keep on delivering, because there's points to be earned?
Maybe he should tank it to ensure that he gets the factory.
Yeah.
Before we get,
if we suddenly start seeing him sitting up at the end of races, conceding 3 spots, so he finishes 11th, won't we?
The one thing that I feel like I don't feel confident about anything in this story, like maybe more than 60%. The one thing that's 70% is this is over. This is over. This is one of the two sides publicly telling the other, no, I don't like you. I don't want you. Let's not continue this. In motor racing, I cannot think off the top of my head of a circumstance where that then gets resolved in a way where the two parties go on to enjoy a happy, fruitful future together.
No. If there's a legal challenge from Aprilia,
that's definitely over. Then it's
at that point it will most likely be to
compensation,
recoup funds, exactly, to take money off Martin, probably a lot of money off Martin.
Yeah,
because they won't keep him. There's no will to keep him, and that goes back to where I think Martin is actually stronger, because imagine a world where Aprilia drag out a legal challenge for 6 months. And he's not able to sign another contract in that 6 months. And then we get to like November, December, January, and we're starting a new MotoGP season, and he's still tied up in legal shenanigans. But Aprilia have Ayagura, who they can drop in at any moment if they need a factory rider. They have the bargaining chip then. It's in Martin's hands. And actually, do you know what? It's not 6 months to July or to November, December, because if they've pushed it back to Misano, it's 6 months from September. They could easily drag this into next season. And I mean, it depends what path they go, but I'm fairly sure that if it went to like Court of Arbitration for Sport, who are kind of focused, who would be the ultimate arbiters of this contract, who are kind of sports focused, then it is entirely possible that Aprilia could block him signing another contract for next year.
Yeah, I don't.
And then suddenly he misses a season of his career, along with the half a season of this year that he's missed.
Doesn't like that. I think that always comes up in a scenario. I think there's maybe like a handful of racing teams that might do it. I think manufacturers generally just tend to try to recoup the costs. I think the fairest outcome would be, if we are correct in thinking that Honda's turned Martin's head directly or indirectly, then just Honda helping Martin pay whatever needs paying to Aprilia and everybody going their separate way after that, I think would be the tidiest outcome for everybody.
That's presuming that Aprilia will settle for a payment. And won't feel so slighted by this that they decide he's not racing for anyone next year.
No, I know, but I don't think manufacturers just generally. Well, you're not a manufacturer. No, it's just like I find it really it just feels like Aprilia. There's like the essence of Aprilia is just first and foremost to make racing happen more than anything. Yeah. That's always the team they've struck me as, that like they don't want to do anything that's gets too far into the politics of this, which by the way is maybe partially what's biting them here right now, because maybe they just didn't see this kind of thing coming at all.
Yeah, and it's probably going to mean that right now Massimo Rivola is a very, very unhappy man, because I think this will be seen as a very personal betrayal.
Which it is. It just is.
Yeah,
it just is. Yeah. You know, all is fair in love and war in MotoGP, but
yeah, but yeah,
just
I think the very personal nature in which this deal was put together is what will make this a very personal insult.
Yeah. Well, there's one more thing to touch on. You've semi alluded to it. Let's imagine a scenario in which Jorge Martin does not race an Aprilia RS-GP next year for the factory team. That means there's an Aprilia RS-GP for the factory team to be raced. Obviously, Aprilia is already in this situation right now and is using test rider Lorenzo Savadori, but for next year, it would have to be an actual regular full-time signing. You immediately felt very strongly that there's just a very simple solution, that's shift Ayagura from Trackhouse to the main team. Let me posit a question to you that we've already talked about, but like you're hearing it for the first time. Is that not a problem in, you have a satellite partner that you want to keep happy, that you want to keep relationships good with? Would it not be a bit of a betrayal to orchestrate a scenario where you take away their main performance driver and their main ray of light in their time in MotoGP so far?
Trackhouse Racing currently don't have a title sponsor, and that makes them somewhat beholden to both Aprilia and to Dorna to a lesser degree. So if Aprilia say something, it's probably going to happen because they don't have too much of a choice in it. But beyond that, we've, completely separate to this conversation, we've also already heard rumors linking Trackhouse to Brazilian Moto2 star and former Moto3 star Diego Moreira. And that's a rider that would come with like, he's a super talent who, I really want to see in MotoGP, because he's you always use the metric of rookie season and Moto2 performance as an indicator of talent, and he had a really good MotoGP rookie season. Yep. So there's a good logic to getting him in a MotoGP bike. We have a Brazilian race for the first time in 25 years next year. A Brazilian MotoGP rider in the grid will bring attention and sponsorship money. There is actually a world in which Trackhouse lose their star to the factory team and end up financially much better off as a result of it. So I think that kind of solves itself. That there is no issue there that I don't see being very easy to rectify.
I should say that I think that there's an X factor in that, and that's Ayagura himself. Ayagura is not really a rider who just goes to where you tell it to go. He is contracted to Trackhouse, not Aprilia, so he would have to feel it is in his interests.
I think the case for that, the case to make to him, is that he is already the number one Aprilia. Why wouldn't he be the factory? Yes. Yeah, he is. He's the number one Aprilia in the standings right now.
In the standings,
why wouldn't he be the factory rider when he's the number one? And I think there's a logic to that would very much appeal to Ayagura's way of thinking.
Yeah, and for Aprilia, maybe the longer term play and the most important long term play is now ensuring that you have this guy in the camp for 27 on factory contract. So how do you ensure 100%. That? You start building him into the factory team already and doing it right now. Yeah. That's an interesting thing to consider that I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about in the coming days. Let's say the plan is still let's say Raul Fernandez's Le Mans improvement is just a blip, for example, and he's like untenable to continue still. which it's 50-50, let's say, right?
I mean, we should say he has a 2-year deal. And obviously deals are useless and meaningless, as we've literally spent 30 minutes talking about. But I think there's a lot of love for him in Aprilia, and I don't think that they'll just cast him out that quickly.
Especially now that they're being cast out.
Especially now that they're in this weird position. And it could well be that he's having a disaster at Aprilia, but they're learning tons from him every day, and that actually him being a disaster is making everyone else faster. There's all sorts of scenarios where I just don't see them getting rid of him so quickly. But I also don't see it being madly wild that the satellite Aprilia team would have, for example, 2 rookies next season.
Yeah. No, I don't either.
And actually, it might even open the door for like a 1-year, let's just say we've done it and give him a chance deal for Jake Dixon or someone like that. That would be very much Dorna approved, British rider. There will always be contenders.
Yeah, for sure.
If they need any, and then obviously 100%. Dixon isn't actually a MotoGP rookie. He's done a few races. He's got a lot of experience. There's enough of a case for a lot of people to be dropped in on a 1-year deal to make that completely fine. I don't see any risk at all to Aprilia there or Trackhouse.
I mean, there has to be some interest from a lot of parties in Manu Gonzalez now, the way he's riding. There has to be.
Exactly.
Even if he's not like the next supernova, but they're just
no. But like 1-year deal between contract extent, between rule changes. There's an argument for Aaron Canet. There's an argument for there's an argument to go to the Superbike paddock and look at Nicola Bulega, who has Pirelli experience.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's all sorts 100%. Of people that are on the table here. There won't be an issue.
I want to ask you though, like, let's say this is happening and like Honda moves for Martin, Honda secures Martin, should say, if I'm Honda, regardless of what optics, etc., I do that 1,000,000 times out of 1,000,000. I pick him over Johan Zarco for the factory team 1,000,000 times out of 1,000,000. I'm sorry, that's just I have to put my foot down on this one. And again, very good Le Mans ride by Zarco, but Zarco should then stay at LCR.
Yeah.
Would Luca Marini make sense?
He would. Absolutely, he would. That's the other thing. Like there is so many contenders for this. Marini would be a great one. Italian-speaking development rider, I think would fit very well with Trackhouse. Ethos. That would work.
But it would also feel, I think, like it would be good for him in the situation that he's now.
Also worth remembering that the Trackhouse team boss is Davide Brivio, who's basically his godfather. He's like another uncle in the Rossi household. So
yeah.
No. There is one other thing we can kind of extrapolate from all this, I think. I think that any interest in, like, presuming that this is all about Honda, and unless we're considering that he's going to replace Alex Rins, which seems less likely.
Less likely, yes.
Much less likely. Then I think this means that Pedro Acosta is conclusively staying at KTM with no way out of his KTM deal, because Pedro Acosta is managed by Albert Valera, who also manages Jorge Martin. So they have to know either he's randomly pissed off 2 factories to pitch his 2 riders for the same seat at the 3rd factory, or there's no way that Acosta goes anywhere now and he's staying with KTM for 26.
Yeah, and then total madness nonsense happens for 2027 when we don't even know.
2027 is just going to blow things completely open. Yeah.
We don't even know.
No, we're going to have
whether there'll be KTMs on the grid.
Exactly. Among all the other mayhem that's going to happen.
Wild. Well, look, this worked out okay for a recording that had to come together in like a 15-minute span. We're going to have a lot more to talk about. We still have the episode planned about Pecco Bagnaia and Fermin Aldeguer for the midweek. That's still happening. Still every intention. It's just we're going to have to do it while checking our phones every 5 minutes during recording. Look, MotoGP, it's fun. It reminds me, remember that year when Jack Miller at Pramac, there were suddenly very strong rumors that Ducati would try to bring in Jorge Lorenzo for his seat? This is that, but on steroids.
Wow. Yeah.
This is, MotoGP, never change.
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. See y'all next time.